Banana Island at night was a jeweled crown on Lagos's head. Avenues lined with manicured palms, mansions spilling light into the quiet lagoon, and chauffeurs waiting by luxury cars that cost more than some people's entire estates. Inside the Luther residence, the air was thick with wealth and expectation. Chandeliers glowed like captured fire, casting gold across long tables dressed in white silk and crystal flutes that sang when touched. At the far end of the room, Kendrick Luther stood in a fitted black suit, every line of his tall, broad frame precise as if he had been carved from steel. 32 years old and the youngest CEO to ever dominate the shipping, oil, and tech sectors simultaneously. Kendrick was a man who made Lagos tremble. His empire stretched from the docks of Apapa to the skyscrapers of Eco-Atlantic. But tonight, for the first time in years, he felt caged. His mother's voice carried through the air like velvet over glass. "Kendrick," she called gently, her eyes a command he could never disobey. "Join us at the table." He turned from the floor-to-ceiling windows, his cold blue-gray eyes reflecting the skyline outside. With every step he took toward the dinner table, the room seemed to part for him. The guests, politicians, boardroom barons, and Lagos's most dangerous socialites, knew power when they saw it, and Kendrick radiated enough to silence whispers. The seat beside him was empty, waiting, almost mocking. Beside that, Chief Anderson sat in his flowing agbada, the deep emerald fabric catching the chandelier's light. The Andersons were the one family Kendrick's father had always called enemies. Rivals in oil, rivals in politics, rivals in legacy. Kendrick had spent years keeping the Anderson name from overtaking his own. And yet, tonight, they were sitting at his table. The doors opened, and the temperature in the room seemed to change. Cynthia Anderson entered with the poise of someone raised to know the world would always look at her. Her red silk gown hugged her curves and shimmered under the chandelier's glow, her dark hair flowing in waves around her shoulders. At 24, she was elegance embodied, warm brown skin, almond eyes that were sharp and unyielding, and a mouth that looked as though it had never once surrendered the truth. Her heels clicked against the marble floor as she approached the table, and though dozens of eyes followed her, hers locked instantly on Kendrick. She did not smile. Neither did he. The air between them thickened like a storm waiting to break. "Cynthia," Chief Anderson announced proudly, his deep voice echoing, "My daughter." She inclined her head, her eyes never leaving Kendrick's. "Mr. Luther, thank you for hosting." "Miss Anderson," Kendrick replied coolly, his voice as smooth as whiskey and twice as dangerous. "Welcome to my home." She sat in the empty chair beside him, her movements precise like a queen forced into enemy territory, but determined to show no weakness. Kendrick caught the faint scent of her perfume, jasmine and something sharper beneath. He looked away before it could anchor him. Dinner resumed with the hum of practiced conversation. Business was discussed in half-truths, politics and veiled warnings. Kendrick responded when spoken to, but his mind was elsewhere, circling like a predator around the inevitable. Every so often, Cynthia's soft laugh rose like a blade against his calm. She asked him about the Luther Foundation's latest medical program. He gave her numbers instead of words. She arched one elegant brow and returned to her wine. Finally, when dessert plates were cleared, Kendrick's mother stood with regal poise. "Shall we retire to the conservatory for a family toast?" The guests murmured approval, and soon the smaller room filled with whispers of jasmine vines and moonlight spilling through glass walls. On a low table, a silver folder lay waiting, its presence heavy, inevitable. Chief Anderson cleared his throat, his gaze sharp as he looked between Kendrick and Cynthia. "Tonight," he began, "we celebrate not just the success of our families, but the future of Lagos itself. For years, the Andersons and the Luthers have battled for dominance, but battles weaken empires. A union strengthens them." Kendrick's jaw tightened. He already knew what was coming, but hearing it aloud made the fire in his chest burn hotter. Cynthia crossed her arms, her silk gown whispering against itself. "If this is about alliances," she said, her voice steady, "sign the contracts. Don't use people as bargaining chips." Her father's smile was the kind that never reached his eyes. My daughter, you are not a bargaining chip. You are the crown jewel of this dynasty. And jewels are bought and sold, Cynthia shot back. Kendrick leaned forward, his voice calm but carrying the weight of steel. What exactly are you suggesting, Chief Anderson? The older man didn't flinch. A marriage between Cynthia and Kendrick, Anderson and Luther together. No more rivals, only power consolidated, untouchable. The room seemed to tilt. Cynthia froze, her lips parting in disbelief. Kendrick's gaze hardened. You can't be serious, she whispered, though her father's expression said he was. She turned sharply to Kendrick. And what do you think of this brilliant plan? Kendrick met her eyes. He could have lied. He could have softened the truth. Instead, his voice came low and unflinching. I think want is irrelevant. Necessity is all that matters. Her jaw clenched, fire sparking in her eyes. So you'll marry a woman you don't want, simply to sign another deal? He didn't blink. I'll do whatever it takes to protect my empire. Silence fell, heavy and unyielding. Cynthia glanced at the silver folder on the table. The contracts already drawn, the signatures waiting like chains. Her chest rose and fell as she tried to steady her breathing. If I say no? She asked softly, daring them all. Her father's voice was iron. Then you say yes later, after you've watched What No costs. Kendrick leaned back in his chair, studying her with something unreadable in his gaze. The truth, Miss Anderson, he said, I don't want this either, but if we must walk into the fire, better to do it together than burn alone. For a moment, her eyes betrayed a flicker of surprise. Then she straightened her shoulders, her chin high. Fine, but if this happens, there will be rules. My life is not a press release, Mr. Luther. And mine, he answered, is not a stage play. The tension snapped like a bowstring as Cynthia reached for the pen, her hand trembling just once before she steadied it. She signed her name, the ink cutting across the page like defiance. Kendrick followed, his signature neat and lethal, sealing their fate. As the room erupted in polite applause, Cynthia whispered under her breath so only he could hear, This is a terrible idea. Without looking at her, Kendrick replied, his voice quiet but certain, It's our idea now. Outside, the lagoon shimmered in moonlight, unconcerned with dynasties or signatures. Inside, under the glow of chandeliers, two unwilling hearts had been bound together, not by love but by necessity. Yet in the unspoken silence between them, something dangerous had already begun to stir. The marble mansion on Banana Island loomed like a citadel, its glass walls gleaming under the morning sun, as though the house itself wanted to remind its occupants of their place. For Cynthia Anderson, arriving at the Luther estate felt less like entering a home and more like stepping into a gilded cage. The black Rolls-Royce slowed to a stop at the wide driveway, where fountains sprayed arcs of water that caught the light like diamonds. Guards in tailored suits stood like statues by the gates. Everything screamed of Kendrick's power, imposing, precise, and inescapable. Cynthia's heels clicked against the polished marble as she stepped out, her red suitcase rolling silently behind her. She had always been accustomed to wealth. Her father's home was no less luxurious. But this mansion felt different. It was colder, sharper, less a house and more a fortress of glass and stone designed to keep the world out and its master untouchable. The butler greeted her with a bow. Welcome, Miss Anderson. Mrs. Luther. Chief Anderson's voice still rang in her ears from last night's toast, though no wedding had yet been celebrated. The papers signed were enough. Cynthia lifted her chin. Where is he? In his study, the butler replied smoothly, gesturing toward the sweeping staircase. Shall I show you to your quarters first? No need, came a deep voice from above. Kendrick Luther descended the staircase like a king descending his throne, every step controlled, his tailored gray suit cut to perfection. His gaze locked onto hers, steady, unyielding. He looked as though he hadn't slept, yet power clung to him like a second skin. Cynthia's lips parted, but she quickly shut them, refusing to let him see the effect he had on her. She had promised herself she would never love this man, never give him that power. But the truth was cruel. The moment he entered a room, her pulse betrayed her. "Welcome to your new home," Kendrick said evenly, his voice neither warm nor cold, just final. "This isn't a home," Cynthia replied, rolling her suitcase toward the base of the stairs. "It's a palace made of mirrors." "And mirrors," Kendrick said, his eyes glinting. "Show us what we'd rather not see." For a beat, silence lingered between them. The butler excused himself discreetly, leaving the two to their private war. Now, Kendrick's gaze flickered to her suitcase. "Your room is on the east wing, large enough for comfort, far enough for peace. You'll find everything arranged." "My room?" Cynthia tilted her head, a mocking smile tugging her lips. "I suppose sharing one would be too much of a fairy tale." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "We are not children playing house, Cynthia. This marriage is a contract, not a romance novel." She stepped closer, her perfume curling into the air between them. "Then why does it feel like you're already fighting to keep your distance?" For the first time, his mask cracked, just slightly. His gaze dropped to her lips before he caught himself. He turned sharply and strode toward his study. "Dinner is at 8, he said over his shoulder. "Don't be late." The hours bled slowly. Cynthia wandered through the mansion, her heels echoing in empty corridors. Every room was immaculate, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the lagoon, marble staircases gleaming, chandeliers dripping with crystals. Yet it was all sterile. There were no family portraits, no careless books left on couches, no signs that a man actually lived here. She found herself pausing in the library, trailing her fingers along the spines of books she doubted Kendrick had ever read. A floor-to-ceiling glass wall revealed the lagoon outside, boats slicing the water with ease. She imagined what her life might have been had her father not signed her away. The truth settled in her chest like a stone. She was trapped, and yet in some dark, unexplainable corner of her heart, she was also intrigued. Kendrick Luther was not the type of man she could ignore, even if she tried. By the time dinner arrived, the mansion's dining room glowed with soft golden light. A long table stretched between them, lined with silver cutlery and candles that reflected in the glass walls. Cynthia sat at one end, Kendrick at the other. The silence between them was louder than the clink of spoons against porcelain. "You'll find Lagos society relentless in their curiosity," Kendrick said finally, his voice measured. "There will be questions. Appearances must be flawless." "I've been performing for society since I was old enough to wear heels," Cynthia shot back. "I think I'll manage." His eyes narrowed, not at her words but at her composure. "This is not the same. You are Mrs. Luther now. Your mistakes will not just stain you, they will stain me." Her laugh was short, sharp, and God forbid anyone should see a crack in the perfect empire. He leaned forward, his gaze piercing through the candlelight. "You think you understand me, Cynthia? You don't. This empire was built on blood and sacrifice. I won't let anyone, friend, enemy, or wife, tear it down." Her breath caught at the word wife. He said it like a weapon, not a bond. And yet, her body betrayed her again, reacting to the fire in his voice, the strength in his jaw, the raw power that radiated from him. "Don't worry," she said, forcing steadiness into her tone. "I have no intention of tearing you down. I prefer to watch you unravel on your own." Something dangerous flickered in his eyes. Then unexpectedly, his lips curved, not into warmth, but into a smile that unsettled her. "Careful," Kendrick murmured. "You might enjoy what you see." Her fork froze halfway to her mouth. Their eyes locked across the expanse of the table, and for one unbearable moment, the air between them thickened with something neither of them wanted to name. Desire. Unspoken. Forbidden. Inevitable. Later that night, Cynthia stood on the balcony of her assigned bedroom, the Lagos skyline glittering in the distance. The wind caught her hair, brushing it against her cheek. She hugged her arms around herself, replaying every word of their dinner, every look he'd thrown her way. She hated him. She hated this arrangement. But beneath the hate was something far more dangerous. a pull she couldn't deny, a magnetic force that made her restless. Behind closed doors, in this marble mansion of glass and shadows, Cynthia Anderson realized that she and Kendrick Luther were caught in a dangerous dance. And no matter how much she swore she would never love him, her heart was already learning the rhythm. The Luther Boardroom on Victoria Island was a fortress of glass and steel, perched high above the city like a throne. From its windows, Lagos sprawled in every direction, chaotic, vibrant, unforgiving. Kendrick Luther stood at the head of the polished ebony table, his expression unreadable as his executives murmured updates about oil shipments, real estate acquisitions, and regulatory whispers. But his mind was elsewhere. A folder sat before him, delivered in secret that morning by one of his most trusted aides. Inside were documents, emails, shell company transfers, whispers of backroom deals. All of it pointed to the same source. Chief Anderson, Cynthia's father. Kendrick's jaw tightened as he turned another page. The evidence was clear. Chief Anderson was quietly building a coalition of investors to undermine Luther Holdings' port logistics subsidiary. It wasn't a direct attack. It was smarter than that. Subtle moves designed to destabilize Kendrick's control, weaken his empire from within, and perhaps even force him to the table on Anderson's terms. The irony wasn't lost on him. They had signed a marriage contract meant to end their family's rivalry, and yet here was Anderson, already digging under the foundation. "Sir?" his CFO asked hesitantly, pulling Kendrick out of his thoughts. "Should we proceed with the Lekki Free Trade Zone expansion?" Kendrick closed the folder and slid it aside, masking his fury. "Proceed, but move quietly. No headlines until the contracts are sealed." He dismissed the room, his voice calm, his eyes storming. As the executives filed out, he remained still, staring at the skyline, every muscle coiled like a predator waiting for the right strike. That evening, Cynthia wandered the halls of the marble mansion, her silk robe brushing the floor as she stopped by the library. She had been restless all day, pacing through endless rooms that echoed with silence. When she finally pushed the double doors open, she found him there. Kendrick stood by the window, the city lights painting his silhouette in silver. His jacket was gone, his shirt sleeves rolled, the tension in his shoulders visible even from across the room. "You look like a man plotting the end of the world," Cynthia said softly. His head turned, eyes sharp. "Maybe I am." She tilted her head, studying him. "Something's wrong. I can tell." Kendrick almost laughed. She had known him for mere days, yet she read him like no one else dared. "Your father," he said finally, his voice measured, "is not a man who honors contracts. Did you know he was already moving against me?" The words landed like a blade between them. Cynthia's breath caught, her eyes flashing. "What are you talking about?" Kendrick stepped closer, placing the folder on the table between them. "Read it." Her hands trembled as she opened the file, scanning the documents. The evidence screamed betrayal, financial schemes, secret meetings, an orchestrated attempt to sabotage Luther Holdings. Her chest tightened, and she shook her head. "No, this can't be right." "It's right," Kendrick said flatly. "Your father has declared war, Cynthia. Even after forcing this marriage, he hasn't stopped." She pressed a hand to her forehead, the weight of it crushing her. "I didn't know. I swear to you, Kendrick, I didn't know." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Her voice was too raw, too earnest to be a lie. He believed her, but belief didn't erase the truth. "What will you do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Kendrick's gaze hardened. "What I always do. Protect my empire. Crush anyone who threatens it." Her eyes glistened, but she met his stare head-on. "Even if that means destroying my family?" His silence was answer enough. Chief Anderson, meanwhile, sat in his Ikoyi estate, swirling a glass of brandy as his associates leaned closer. The room buzzed with low voices and quiet ambition. "Luther is strong," one investor said cautiously. "Too strong to topple outright." Anderson smiled thinly. "Empires don't fall in one blow. They crumble from within. A little pressure here, a whisper there. Soon the cracks spread, and when Kendrick looks up, he will realize the ground beneath him has vanished. Another man chuckled nervously. And the marriage? Won't people question your loyalty? Anderson's eyes gleamed. The marriage is the perfect cover. While the city believes we are allies, I dismantle him piece by piece. And when his empire falls, it will be my daughter standing on the ruins, wearing my name. Back at the Luther mansion, Cynthia sat alone in her room, the folder open on her lap. Her father's betrayal sliced her in two, loyalty to blood pulling one way, loyalty to her own conscience pulling the other. She could hear Kendrick's voice in her head. I will protect my empire, no matter the cost. For the first time, Cynthia realized the depth of the war she had been pulled into. This marriage wasn't just a contract, it was a battlefield. And she was standing in the crossfire. Later that night, Kendrick stood on the balcony outside his private study, staring at the city skyline. He heard the faint sound of footsteps behind him, soft and hesitant. Cynthia appeared in the doorway, wrapped in a pale silk robe, her hair falling in loose waves around her face. She looked smaller somehow, fragile against the vastness of the glass house. You should tell me, she said quietly. Tell you what? When you make your move against my father. Her voice cracked, but remained steady. I need to know. I can't stop you, but I can't bear being the last to find out either. Kendrick turned, his eyes softening just slightly. He reached out, brushing his fingers along her wrist, almost absently. The contact sent a shock through both of them. You're asking me to promise honesty, he murmured. Yes. He looked at her for a long time, then withdrew his hand. Honesty is a dangerous currency in this world, Cynthia. But for you, I'll try. Her throat tightened. For a moment, they simply stood there, the city burning below them, their hearts caught between war and something far more dangerous. Neither spoke again, but both knew the battle had already begun. The gala at Victoria Island's Grand Marquis was the kind of event where Lagos decided who mattered and who didn't. Rows of crystal chandeliers glittered over polished marble floors, their light bouncing off sequined gowns and tuxedos cut from Milan's finest fabric. Waiters glided between clusters of senators, tycoons, and heirs carrying champagne on silver trays. When Kendrick and Cynthia walked in, the room shifted, conversations dipped, eyes turned, and camera flashes sparked like lightning. Together they looked untouchable. Kendrick in a charcoal suit that sculpted his tall frame, Cynthia in a sapphire gown that shimmered with every step, her hair swept to one side, exposing the graceful line of her neck. They were the new face of Lagos power, Anderson and Luther united, a picture-perfect couple, a lie. Kendrick's hand rested lightly at the small of her back as they moved through the crowd. To the watching world, it was affection. To Cynthia, it was restraint, a hand that could both guide and cage her. Smile, he murmured under his breath. They're watching. Her lips curved into something elegant, though her eyes flashed with irritation. You don't have to remind me. I was born performing. They mingled with politicians who praised the historic union, business magnates who toasted to unbreakable alliances, and gossip columnists who whispered about the tension they swore they could sense. Every smile was rehearsed, every word measured. Kendrick answered questions with cool authority. Cynthia charmed with wit that cut sharper than silk. But beneath the flawless act, both burned. The evening dragged until the orchestra began a slow piece, and couples moved toward the dance floor. A senator's wife tugged Cynthia forward with a bright smile. You must dance. Everyone's waiting to see you two together. Kendrick extended his hand, his jaw tight. Shall we? Cynthia hesitated, then placed her palm in his. Heat shot up her arm at the contact, unwelcome but undeniable. He led her onto the floor, and soon they were surrounded by glittering couples swaying to the music. His hand pressed against her waist, firm but careful. Her other hand rested against his chest, and she could feel the steady thrum of his heartbeat under layers of fine fabric. For a moment, the noise of the gala faded. You hate this, she said softly, her eyes locked on his. I don't dance, he replied. You're doing it now. He leaned closer, his breath brushing her ear. For appearances. Her lips curved, almost a smile. Of course. But the way his eyes lingered on hers betrayed something deeper. The air between them tightened, charged, until Cynthia looked away, forcing herself to remember who he was. The man tied to her through contracts, not affection. Later, while Kendrick was pulled aside by a group of investors, Cynthia slipped away from the crowd, her sapphire gown trailing as she pushed open the doors to the balcony. Cool night air washed over her, heavy with the scent of sea breeze and the faint hum of Lagos traffic. She leaned against the railing, staring out at the city lights. For the first time that evening, she could breathe. Running away already? Kendrick's voice cut through the night. She stiffened but didn't turn. Just needed air. Too many people pretending inside. Pretending is the currency of Lagos, he said, stepping closer. His presence was magnetic, impossible to ignore. She turned to face him, her eyes sharp. And what are we pretending, Kendrick? That we're in love? That our families aren't already at each other's throats? He held her gaze, his expression unreadable. We're pretending we can survive this arrangement without destroying each other. Her chest tightened at the honesty in his tone. For once, he wasn't the untouchable CEO. He was a man carrying too much weight, staring down a war he didn't choose. Do you ever get tired of carrying it all? She asked softly. His eyes flickered, surprise, then something raw. He stepped closer until the space between them was too small, the city lights reflecting in his gray eyes. Tired doesn't matter. The empire doesn't sleep, so neither do I. Cynthia's heart pounded. She should have stepped back, but instead she whispered, And what about you? The man, not the empire. For the first time, Kendrick faltered. His jaw worked, but no words came. He looked at her like she was prying open doors he had nailed shut years ago. Silence pressed against them, heavy and dangerous. His hand lifted, almost unconsciously, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. The touch was fleeting, but it burned. Kendrick, she whispered, her voice breaking. He froze, realizing how close he'd leaned, how easily he could close the gap between them. For a heartbeat, it would have been so simple to kiss her, to surrender to the pull that haunted him since the moment she walked into his mansion. But then he stepped back, his walls slamming shut. We should go inside, he said, his voice rough. Cynthia's breath trembled, her chest aching from the sudden distance. She looked away, blinking hard against emotions she didn't want to name. Of course, appearances. They re-entered the ballroom, side by side, the perfect couple once more. No one watching could see the storm that had nearly broken through on the balcony, the secret both carried back inside with them. Later that night, long after the gala ended, Kendrick stood alone in his study, staring at his reflection in the glass wall. His fingers still tingled from the brief touch of her skin. He told himself it was nothing. He told himself she was still his enemy's daughter. But deep down, he knew the truth. The walls he had built around his heart were beginning to crack. And Cynthia? In the privacy of her room, she pressed her hands to her chest, her heartbeat racing. She hated him. She swore she did. But something dangerous was happening in that marble cage, and she wasn't sure she had the strength to stop it. The days after the Victoria Island Gala passed in a haze of unspoken tension. To the public, Kendrick Luther and Cynthia Anderson were a flawless union. Photographs stepping out of luxury cars, smiling at ribbon cuttings, appearing side by side at charity dinners. But behind the glass walls of the Banana Island mansion, silence and stolen glances told a different story. Cynthia often found herself alone in the library, her mind restless, her heart heavier with each passing day. She had been raised in politics and power. She knew how to read whispers, and lately the whispers had started reaching her ears. Her father was plotting. She heard it first at a luncheon hosted by the wives of prominent businessmen. One of them, too careless after her second glass of champagne, leaned in close and said, "Your father is bold, Cynthia. To attack Luther Holdings so soon after the marriage. Well, I hope you're not caught in the crossfire." Cynthia had smiled politely, her pulse racing. She hadn't asked questions. To ask would have been to admit she knew nothing. Instead, she had endured the rest of the luncheon, her food untouched, her thoughts consumed. Back at the mansion, she slipped quietly into Kendrick's study, searching for answers. The desk was immaculate, as always, but a folder half buried beneath financial reports caught her attention. She opened it, her breath catching. There it was, evidence of her father's schemes, shell companies, false acquisitions, signatures she recognized. Her knees weakened, and she gripped the edge of the desk. The truth was undeniable. Her father was moving against her husband, even as the ink on their marriage contracts dried. That evening, Kendrick returned home late, his tie loosened, his expression carved from stone. He found Cynthia waiting for him in the study, the folder open on the desk between them. "So it's true," she said, her voice trembling but steady. "My father is trying to destroy you." Kendrick froze in the doorway, his gray eyes narrowing. "You went through my things." "I had to know," she snapped, rising to her feet. "Do you think I enjoy being the last to hear about my own family's betrayal?" His jaw tightened. "It wasn't your burden to carry." She stepped closer, her eyes burning. "It is my burden, Kendrick. He's my father, my blood. And you're my—" She cut herself off, the word husband catching in her throat. Kendrick's gaze darkened. "So where does your loyalty lie, Cynthia? With me or with him?" The question sliced her open. Tears welled in her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "Don't you dare ask me that. You think this is easy for me? That I can just sever blood ties and pretend none of it matters?" "Blood has never mattered to me," Kendrick said coldly. "Only loyalty. And right now, I don't know if I can trust yours." Her breath hitched. For a long moment they stared at each other, the air thick with hurt and something more dangerous. Fear. Fear of what they were becoming to each other. Fear of what they might lose. Later that night, Cynthia lay awake in her room, staring at the ceiling. Her mind replayed every word, every look. She hated her father for putting her here, torn between two men who demanded her loyalty. And yet, beneath the turmoil, she realized something terrifying. She wanted Kendrick to choose her, to believe in her, to see her not as her father's daughter, but as his partner. Meanwhile, Kendrick sat in his private study, a glass of whiskey untouched beside him. He had built his empire on mistrust, on anticipating betrayal before it struck. It had kept him alive, kept him untouchable. But with Cynthia, the rules didn't fit. She was the enemy's daughter, and yet when she looked at him, he saw no deceit. Only pain, only longing, only truth. And that truth haunted him. The next morning, Cynthia walked into the breakfast room, her silk blouse crisp, her hair neatly tied back. Kendrick was already there, scrolling through his tablet, a cup of black coffee in front of him. She sat across from him, her back straight. "I want to help," she said quietly. He didn't look up. "Help?" "With my father," she pressed. "I know his strategies. I know the people he trusts. Let me stand by you, Kendrick." Finally, his eyes lifted, locking onto hers. They were unreadable, hard as stone. "And if standing by me means tearing him down?" Her throat tightened, but she didn't look away. "Then I'll do it, because he chose his war, not me, and I won't let his choices define mine." Something shifted in his expression then, a crack in the armor. For the first time in days, he saw not Chief Anderson's daughter, but Cynthia, her defiance, her strength, her willingness to sacrifice. He reached across the table, his hand brushing hers. It was a small touch, fleeting, but it sent fire rushing through her veins. "You'll regret it," he murmured. "Maybe," she whispered back, "but not as much as I'd regret losing myself." For a moment, neither moved. The tension between them was unbearable, a thread pulled too tight. Then Kendrick withdrew, his mask returning. "Stay close to me, and don't trust anyone, not even the walls." That night, they attended another function together, a high-stakes investor dinner in Ikoyi. Cameras flashed as they arrived, the perfect couple once again, but beneath the polished smiles, Cynthia carried a storm inside her. She laughed when she was supposed to, charmed when it was expected, yet her eyes kept finding Kendrick across the room, and each time his gaze met hers, lingering longer than it should. It was a silent language, a tether neither of them could sever. On the drive home, the city lights streaking past, Cynthia finally broke the silence. "You don't have to face this alone, Kendrick. I'm here, whether you want me or not." His grip tightened on the steering wheel, his jaw clenched. "You'll regret saying that." She turned to him, her eyes soft but steady. "Then let me regret it with you." The words hung in the air, heavy and dangerous. Kendrick said nothing, but when they pulled into the mansion gates, he looked at her as though she had just crossed a line no one else had ever dared. In the quiet of her room, Cynthia pressed her hands to her chest, her heart racing. She was losing herself to him, his strength, his darkness, his rare glimpses of vulnerability. And Kendrick? Alone in his study once more, he whispered into the night what he would never admit to her face. "If she betrays me, I won't survive it." For the first time in years, the ruthless CEO realized he was no longer fighting just for his empire. He was fighting for his heart. The storm had been building for days, silent and relentless. In the glass mansion on Banana Island, Kendrick and Cynthia circled each other like predators, neither willing to yield, both tethered by something they refused to name. Tonight, it snapped. It began in the study. Cynthia had cornered him, her hands slamming the folder of evidence against his desk. "I told you I wanted honesty," she cried, her voice cracking. "But you still keep secrets. You knew my father was planning more, didn't you? You knew, and you didn't tell me." Kendrick's eyes burned, gray and sharp like lightning cutting through storm clouds. "And what would you have done with that knowledge, Cynthia? Run back to him? Warn him?" Her chest heaved. "Do you really think so little of me? I think blood is louder than promises." His voice was low, dangerous, but beneath the steel there was pain. "And I won't gamble my empire on your loyalty." Her eyes glistened, but she refused to cry. She stepped closer, close enough to feel the heat radiating off his body. "I've stood here, in your house, against my own father. I've chosen you every single day since we signed that damn contract, and still you doubt me." His jaw tightened, his fists curling at his sides. "Because if I don't doubt you, Cynthia, you'll be the one thing that can break me." The words hit her harder than any accusation. For a long, breathless moment, silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. The truth in his voice cracked something inside her. She took another step forward, her voice trembling. "Then let me break you." Kendrick froze. His breath caught as her words seared through him, and in the next second, the dam shattered. He grabbed her, pulling her against him with a force that stole her breath. His mouth crashed onto hers. Hungry, furious, desperate. She gasped against him, her hands pressed to his chest as if to push him away, but her fingers curled into his shirt instead, clinging like she'd been starving for this all along. The kiss deepened, their lips colliding in a war neither wanted to win. It wasn't tender, it was fire, anger, longing, and surrender tangled into one. His hand slid into her hair, tilting her head back as he devoured her mouth. She moaned against him, the sound breaking whatever resolve he had left. He lifted her effortlessly, setting her on the edge of his desk. Papers scattered to the floor, forgotten. She wrapped her legs around his waist, pulling him closer until there was no space left between them. "Tell me you hate me," Kendrick growled against her lips, his breath hot and ragged. "Tell me you want to walk away." Her nails scraped down his shoulders, her eyes blazing. "I can't," she gasped. "God help me, I can't." His forehead pressed to hers, his breathing uneven. "Then you'll be mine, every part of you." The words ignited her. She pulled his mouth back to hers, kissing him with every ounce of defiance and desire she had buried. His hands roamed her body, sliding over silk, tracing the curves he had tried so hard to ignore. When his lips trailed down her neck, biting softly, she gasped his name. Kendrick. The sound of it, his name from her lips, undid him. He tugged at the silk of her blouse, pulling it free, his touch reverent and reckless all at once. She arched into him, her body trembling, her heart racing. For so long she had sworn she wouldn't love him, and yet here in the heat of his arms, her body betrayed her, crying out for him, surrendering. "You drive me insane," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I swore I'd never give you this. But I want you. I want you more than I've ever wanted anything." His eyes met hers, raw and vulnerable, for the first time. "Then take me," he said, his voice low, rough with need, "because I've been yours since the moment you walked into my house." Their mouths crashed again, harder, deeper. Every kiss was a promise and a punishment. Every touch both war and worship. Clothes fell away, barriers crumbled, and soon there was nothing left between them but skin and fire. Kendrick laid her back against the desk, his lips trailing down her body as if memorizing every inch. She shivered beneath him, her breath coming in gasps. "Please," she whispered, the word tearing from her throat. He paused, his eyes locking on hers. "Say it again." "Please," she breathed, her fingers gripping his shoulders. "I need you." The sound undid him completely. He claimed her with a fire that consumed them both, every movement fierce, desperate, and unbearably real. Cynthia cried out, her voice echoing through the glass walls, her body arching against his as if she had been waiting her whole life for this moment. They moved together in a rhythm that felt inevitable, their anger melting into something deeper. Raw, unstoppable love. Every kiss on her skin, every moan from her lips was a confession neither of them had dared to speak. "Kendrick," she gasped, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I've kept myself for this. For you. I don't know why, but I knew. I knew it would always be you." His breath caught, his heart slamming against his ribs. For the first time, the ruthless CEO faltered, undone by her honesty. He kissed her like a vow, his hands trembling against her skin. "You're mine," he whispered fiercely, "and I swear I'll never let you go." Their bodies burned, their hearts collided, and in that moment, there was no rivalry, no empire, no betrayal. There was only them, two souls who had fought so hard to resist, finally surrendering to the inevitable. When it was over, Cynthia lay against him, her chest rising and falling as her fingers traced patterns on his skin. The fire between them hadn't dimmed, it had only changed, settling into something deeper, more dangerous. Kendrick pressed a kiss to her hair, his voice low. "You've ruined me." She smiled faintly against his chest, her eyes drifting shut. "Then we're both ruined." And as the city glittered beyond the glass walls, they lay together, bound not by contracts or empires, but by a love that had finally, impossibly, begun to bloom. The news broke like a thunderclap. Luther Holdings under fire, Port subsidiary faces allegations of fraud. Headlines screamed across Lagos the next morning, flashing on every screen, every billboard, whispered in every boardroom. Anonymous reports accused Kendrick Luther's port logistics empire of falsifying numbers, skimming contracts, bribing officials. The timing was surgical, the execution brutal. And Kendrick knew immediately who was behind it: Chief Anderson. Kendrick stood in the center of his office tower in Victoria Island, the glass walls buzzing with the voices of panicked executives. His phone rang endlessly. Investors demanded answers. Regulators called emergency meetings. He remained still, calm, a storm contained within a man. "Sir, we need to respond," his CFO urged, sweat beating at his temples. "Issue a statement, deny everything, reassure the market." Kendrick's gaze was steel. "No, We wait. Panic will prove them right. Silence will remind them who we are. But the shares, they'll recover. Kendrick cut him off. His voice carried finality, and the room hushed. Still, when the meeting ended and the executives scattered, he remained alone, staring at the headline glowing on his tablet. His empire was under siege. His enemy was his father-in-law, and the woman he wanted more than his own breath carried that enemy's name. Back at the mansion, Cynthia read the news in horror. Her father's strike was public, merciless, designed to cripple Kendrick. She remembered the whispered investor dinners, the hushed conversations, the folder Kendrick had shown her. He had warned her. She hadn't wanted to believe it. Her father had declared war. When Kendrick returned home that evening, his shoulders heavy with battle, Cynthia was waiting in the marble foyer. She wore a black dress, simple and elegant, her eyes sharp and unflinching. "I know it's him," she said before he spoke. Kendrick's gaze flickered, the first crack in his composure. "And you still stand here?" She stepped closer, her voice steady. "I told you I won't let his choices define mine. This is my war now, too." Something shifted in his chest. Something he didn't have a name for. He wanted to warn her away, to protect her from the fire that would consume them both. But when he looked into her eyes, he saw not fear, but strength. "You'll be judged for this," he warned. "Society will tear you apart. Let them try." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "I'm my father's daughter, Kendrick, but I'm also your wife." The word hung in the air between them, wife. Not contract, not alliance. Wife. For the first time, it felt real. The next evening, they attended a high-profile investor gala at Eco-Atlantic Towers. Rumors swirled like smoke as they entered, cameras flashing furiously. Whispers followed them through the marble lobby. Anderson's daughter. Luther's scandal. How long before it collapses? Kendrick felt the weight of every stare, but beside him, Cynthia shone. Her sapphire gown clung to her curves, her head held high, her smile calm and devastating. She slipped her hand into his, not for the cameras, but for him. The gesture stole his breath. At the gala dinner, a rival CEO raised his glass with a smirk. "To strong alliances," he said loudly, his eyes glinting. "May they survive the storms." The room chuckled, the jab obvious. Kendrick's jaw tightened, ready to deliver a cutting retort. But Cynthia spoke first. "To strong men," she said smoothly, raising her glass, "who forget that storms don't break steel, they forge it." The room hushed, stunned. Cameras clicked. Kendrick looked at her, his chest tightening with something dangerously close to pride. Later, away from the noise, Kendrick and Cynthia found themselves on another balcony overlooking the city. The night air was cool, the lights of Lagos shimmering like stars fallen to earth. "You didn't have to defend me," Kendrick said, his voice low. "Yes, I did," Cynthia replied, "because I know what it feels like to be doubted, to be torn in two, and I won't let them do to you what my father has done to me." Kendrick stepped closer, his hand cupping her cheek. "You risk everything standing with me." Her lips parted, her eyes soft. "Then let me risk it." The kiss that followed wasn't the firestorm of their first. It was slower, deeper, a vow unspoken. For the first time, Kendrick kissed her, not out of fury or need, but out of something terrifying. Tenderness. Chief Anderson watched the footage of their kiss later that night on the news. His glass of brandy stilled in his hand. His associates shifted nervously. "She's slipping," one whispered. "She's standing with him." Anderson's jaw tightened. "Then she'll fall with him." Back at the mansion, Kendrick and Cynthia sat in the quiet library, the chaos of the world locked outside. For once, they weren't enemies. They weren't rivals. They were just two people clinging to each other in the eye of a storm. Kendrick's voice was raw when he finally spoke. "I don't know how to be anything other than ruthless. I've fought too long, lost too much." Cynthia reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "Then let me fight with you," Let me remind you that you don't have to do this alone. He looked at her, truly looked at her, and realized the empire he had sworn to protect wasn't just marble floors and glass towers. It was here, in her hand, in her eyes, in the woman who had every reason to betray him but chose to stay. And for the first time in years, Kendrick Luther dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, love was worth more than power. Months later, the Luther mansion on Banana Island no longer felt like a fortress. It felt alive. The glass walls that once caged Cynthia now opened onto a life she had built with Kendrick, one filled with laughter, quiet evenings, and a partnership forged in fire. The war with Chief Anderson had raged for weeks, each blow harder than the last. But with Cynthia at his side, Kendrick had stood unbroken. She had faced society's whispers, the betrayal of her own blood, and the storm of public scandal, and she had not faltered. When investors tried to waver, she spoke with grace and conviction. When journalists dug for cracks, she gave them poise instead of weakness. Slowly the tide turned. Kendrick's enemies found themselves outmaneuvered, their plots exposed. Chief Anderson's allies abandoned him one by one, and in the end it was Cynthia who dealt the final blow, testifying against her father at a closed-door inquiry. Her voice calm, her eyes steady, her loyalty unshakable. Kendrick had watched her that day with something deeper than admiration. It was awe. On a warm Lagos evening, Kendrick stood on the balcony of their bedroom, the city lights glittering like scattered jewels. He wore a crisp white shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, his powerful frame relaxed in a way it never had been before. For the first time in years, he wasn't carrying the empire alone. Behind him, Cynthia stepped out, her silk gown flowing around her as the wind lifted her hair. She leaned against the railing beside him, her hand brushing his. "You're quiet tonight," she said softly. He turned, his gray eyes softer than she had ever seen them. "I was thinking," he admitted, "about how far we've come, about how I never wanted this marriage, and yet," his gaze lingered on her face, "it's the only decision that's ever saved me." Her lips curved, but her eyes shimmered. "You didn't choose me, Kendrick. Our families did." He shook his head slowly, stepping closer. His hand cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing the curve of her jaw. "No, Cynthia, I chose you the moment you stood in that ballroom and defended me when the world wanted me on my knees. I chose you the night you told me you'd risk everything to stand by my side, and every day since I've chosen you again." Her throat tightened, her chest aching with the weight of his words. "And I chose you the night you kissed me like I was more than just a contract. I thought I hated you, Kendrick. God, I wanted to hate you. But love doesn't ask for permission, does it?" "No," he whispered, his forehead pressing to hers. "It doesn't." The kiss that followed was nothing like the first. No anger, no firestorm. It was slow, deep, reverent. The kiss of a man who had finally surrendered, not to defeat, but to love. Weeks later, society gathered once more in Victoria Island, but this time it wasn't for whispers of scandal, it was for celebration. The Luther Foundation's annual gala glittered brighter than ever. Politicians, business magnates, and socialites filled the marble hall, but all eyes turned to the couple at the center. Kendrick and Cynthia moved together with ease now, his hand resting at the small of her back, not out of necessity, but out of instinct. She laughed genuinely, her smile radiant, her eyes soft when they lingered on him. "Ladies and gentlemen," Kendrick said as he took the stage, his voice commanding, yet warm, "tonight we celebrate more than philanthropy. We celebrate resilience. We celebrate loyalty. And I want to thank my wife, Cynthia Luther, not just for standing beside me, but for reminding me what true strength looks like." The room erupted in applause. Cameras flashed. Cynthia's cheeks warmed, but she didn't look at the crowd. She looked at him. Only him. Later that night, back at the mansion, they walked hand in hand through the quiet garden. Lanterns glowed softly among flowers, the lagoon reflecting the moonlight like glass. Cynthia stopped by the short stone fence that marked the edge of the property. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. Kendrick frowned. "Regret what?" "Choosing me," she whispered, her eyes searching his. His answer was immediate. "Never." He tilted her chin, forcing her to see the truth in his gaze. "Because in choosing you, Cynthia, I finally chose myself too." Her heart swelled. She leaned into him, their lips meeting in a kiss that sealed not just their marriage, but their love. Behind the mansion's marble walls, the city pulsed with life and ambition. But here, in their garden, there was only peace. Months ago, they had been enemies, pawns in a game played by dynasties. But now they were more than husband and wife. They were partners, equals, a team forged in fire and tempered by love. Cynthia Anderson, the daughter of Kendrick's fiercest rival, had become Cynthia Luther, the bride he had chosen. And Kendrick Luther, ruthless billionaire CEO, had finally found the one thing his empire could never buy: love.